Hey everybody, how's it going? So, I think the time has come to do another video on ranking my sustained damage builds. I am not in my usual recording place at home, and I know that that's suboptimal. The audio quality is probably not going to be as good. You might be hearing a little bit of feedback. The background's a little more boring. This is where it needed to happen today, so I hope you can endure the imperfection. But in case you didn't know, I really love sustained damage builds in D&D. Obviously, to date, of the 71 D&D optimized episodes that I've done, 28 of them have been sustained damage builds. You probably thought it was more, didn't you? I know I did, actually. That was surprising. I thought it was more than half. Something that you probably know about me already is that I really like to do everything in my power to remove RNG from the game, random number generating, and just build something that works reliably and basically all of the time. It's why I really chafe at like wild magic stuff and chaos stuff, right? Even though a lot of the times that kind of thing can make the game more fun and exciting and unexpected. And I know it seems like a crazy thing to say when you're talking about a game that is like all about the dice rolls. I mean, I enjoy the dice a lot. I really do. I just want to do everything I can to put the odds in my favor, I suppose, is what it is. And also, sometimes I agonize a little bit knowing when to spend limited resources when my character is very heavily dependent on those limited resources, even though using limited resources can be a lot of fun in D&D. And I have grown to embrace that aspect, I think, of the game a little bit more in recent months. I like things that are reliable. What can I say? I'm a Taurus. And I also, of course, really like to graph things and keep spreadsheets on stuff, which is something that I've not always known about myself, actually, I think. But it's hard to have a super user-friendly graph when you have 14 lines on a graph just crisscrossing each other, right? I run out of colors, among other things. So many months ago, for this reason, I split my sustained damage builds into 2 tiers. You can see that if you're curious to see kind of where we've been and where we were. But since then, I've created a lot more sustained damage builds, and even those 2 tiers are not enough, and my spreadsheets are too crowded, so I think the time has finally come to split them into 3. Maybe just pausing briefly as we revisit these old builds just to see how they're doing, check in on them, take a little stroll down memory lane. And actually, I did kind of figure that this might be a sort of useful exercise, not just for nostalgia purposes and even for usability purposes, but it might be a useful exercise or sort of point of reference for those who have maybe joined the channel somewhat recently and maybe haven't had the time to go back and watch every single old episode. So maybe this could serve as a sort of catalog or a point of reference, a table of contents, if you will, at least for the sustained damage builds, to see if there's one in the backlog that you haven't watched but that you might find interesting. Now, for those who don't know, the way I rank these is just a very oversimplified and not particularly objective method of just taking all of the damage numbers that a build would do from enemy armor classes of 10 to 25 that I report on in my damage reports at level 6, 9, 13, and 17, and just averaging all of those together to give me one number. And that number is their tier score. It doesn't give extra weight to like earlier levels, like maybe it should, since most of us play most of the game, at those earlier levels. It doesn't give extra weight to like more common enemy armor classes. We don't face enemy armor classes of 25 all that often, nor of 10 for that matter. And maybe it should do those things. That might be a little more revealing, but I just wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to keep it easy. Mostly, I just wanted kind of a simple way to separate these builds from one another so I could put them in separate spreadsheets and declutter my spreadsheets. So all of these things are kind of taken with a grain of salt, right? Just like I did then with the Nova builds, with my Nova builds a few weeks ago, can see that there if you haven't. I'm going to make this a little more free form, no script or heavy editing. You can see me looking at my notes. This is maybe the only time I'm going to look a lot at notes here because I just don't have the time to write a script and to do a lot of editing. So I'm kind of just going to talk about these off the cuff, mostly based on memory, and hopefully I won't ramble too much. Yeah, right. All right, so let's just jump in. We're going to start off at the bottom and work our way up. So tier 3, coming in at number 28, the lowliest of the sustained damage round builds to date, is the Mounted Battlesmith with a 39 average DPR tier score. You know, this one, at the time that I did this, I had had so many requests to do it, and it was always build a small creature, and then you mount your steel defender or your companion if you're a beastmaster, and you ride into battle, and it's really powerful and really amazing. And even some people suggested you can use 2 lances, because when you're mounted, a lance isn't a two-handed weapon. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Let's see if we can make it work. And it turns out it works, but maybe not as good as you might think. There are probably things that I could have done to improve it. I really tried to do all of the tricks that I could think of at the time, and I don't think it's an unviable character. I mean, again, remember, these builds are built for sustained damage, so it's usable. It might be a little wonky to have 2 lances. Your DM might shut that down just because they might say, rules is written maybe, but that's weird, and no. But anyway, it was fun. I enjoyed it. At number 27, with a tier score of 41.38, I have to use decimals when it otherwise looks like it's a tie, is my first ever monk build, the Munger. It was a monk ranger. At the time, this was an early build, and at the time, this was actually like maybe when it first dawned on me just how underpowered monks were in 5e. This was very similar to a monk, to the first character that I ever played in D&D 5th edition, and at the time I remember thinking, my character's pretty good and quite powerful, and I could probably do some things to improve their sustained damage, and so I built one, and I was like, oh, it's okay, but yeah, it really pales in comparison to some of the other builds that I'd already done up to that point, your Hexblade Warlocks and your ranged crossbow expert fighters, things like that. So anyway, I had fun with it. You could make it work, but yeah, it's not super strong from a damage perspective. Surprising no one but me, I guess. At number 26, with a 41.44 tier score, we have, this was actually the first build that I ever did that was just kind of weird, and where I gave myself artificial restrictions in the name of story or character. It was the Sorcerer with the Magic Touch, or the Magic Touch Sorcerer. This character could only do damage with spells that had a range of touch. The story was, there's something innate about their corporal form that, the magic had to be transferred only via touch, and if you touched them or if they touched you, then bad things happened. But otherwise, so sort of similar to like a rogue from the X-Men or something, right? I had a lot of fun with it, and it really kind of started me on this journey, I suppose, of finding kind of weird character concepts and ideas, but then trying to optimize within these sort of artificial restrictions, and I've had a lot of fun with a lot of them since then, and this was one. At number 25, with a tier score of 45, was the first and last, to date, time that I've done a non-official content build for D&D. It was the Blood Hunter Mutant. I had a lot of fun with it. I know that Blood Hunters are allowed at a lot of tables, even though they're not official Wizards of the Coast content. Matt Mercer and Critical Role being what they are and having the influence that they do in D&D at large. I had a lot of fun with this. I loved the numbers of it. They were mixed with a Battlesmith, I believe, for intelligence on attack, and it felt to me like they were stronger than they actually kind of ended up being. But I still had a lot of fun with it. I think it's a great Geralt of Rivia. Ooh, The Witcher Season 2 comes out in 2 days, 1 day from this video. Can't wait for that. But anyway, yeah, that was a fun one. I don't know if I'm going to do a lot more Blood Hunters in the future, though. I know I do get a number of requests for them fairly consistently, so maybe it's inevitable, but yeah, that was a good one. Number 24, with a tier score of 46, we have the Bard Locker. This was a Bard. Let's see, was it Swords Bard or Lore Bard? I think it was a Swords Bard. Yes, it was. A Swords Bard mixed with some Warlock. This was my first attempt, and still to date one of my only attempts, at creating a high damage Bard character. And so they were ranged character. I was trying to make a really good archer. They turned out pretty well. This was mostly for my friend Preston, who just loves bards as much as I love monks. And I had fun with it. I think it turned out decent. At number 23, with a tier score of 47, we have the Swarmkeeper Ranger. I did this just a few weeks ago. I had a lot of fun with this. I loved the concept of the Swarmkeeper, and this was also one where I really tried to build around the sling, right? Using the magic stone spell as well, and try to find a way to make the sling really cool and powerful, though it's often seen as kind of a suboptimal weapon choice. This was also this is also the first on the list here of what I'll call my spike growth trio. It was built around, casting spike growth and trying to move your enemies through spike growth. That's always fun, though it might not always work out great in game, depending on your table, depending on the room. But anyway, that was a good one. Then we have at number 22 with a tier score of 49, the Beastmaster 2.0. I did a Beastmaster 1.0 that was a player's handbook Beastmaster. I think to date it still might be my lowest ever viewed video. Go give it some love. Poor player's handbook Beastmaster. I tried so hard with that. And ultimately it ended up much worse than this. It probably would have been lowest on the totem pole if I would have kept it in. But anyway, Beastmaster 2.0 was after Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that gave us the Primal Companions. Beastmaster, of course, got a lot of nice quality of life and, damage improvements from Tasha's. And this is one of the only straight class, no multi-classing characters that I've ever done. You guys know I love to multi-class, but I do get a number of requests for, straight class characters. So if you're one of those people that are looking for that, here's a good option, I think. And I think the Primal Companion Beastmaster is in a really good place and could be a lot of fun if you love your pets. At number 21, with a tier score of 50.85, we have the Fey Wanderer Ranger. That's 3 Rangers in a row. Seems to be a theme here. Fey Wanderer, if I were to play a Ranger in D&D today, it would be this. It would be this build, I think. Because I love the Fey, and this character just surrounded themselves with lots of Fey companions and made lots of attacks, and it would have been a lot of fun. There's so much great flavor, I think, with the Fey Wanderer especially, that I just absolutely love. But their damage is obviously pretty decent too. At number 20, with a tier score of 51 even, we have the first and I want to say probably last time that I've ever done a build for a character from existing fiction outside of D&D and tried to recreate them in Dungeons and Dragons, right? I did the Kaladin Stormblast, the Windrunner. And I know that hearing that might be disappointing to some of you, because I do get a number of requests for, hey, do Aang from Avatar, or, any other number of requests. And as I explained in that video, actually, I just don't love doing that. It's just not my cup of tea. Tulok the Barbarian, is that his name? Turok? Anyway, there are other YouTube channels that do that and do it very well. And I think I'll let them continue to do that and do it well without stepping on their toes. I don't know. For me, D&D is about sort of recreating my story, and I'm just not super interested in trying to take a square peg and fit it into a round hole, I guess, in that way. Obviously, if there's ever enough demand for a certain character or whatever, then I might do it again sometime. But I actually really did have a lot of fun with this, and I do love the Stormlight Archive and all of Brandon Sanderson's work, really. So trying to make Kaladin in D&D was fun and a challenge for sure. I ended up going mostly Warlock, I think, but I really kind of restricted myself to try and say, okay, like these things have to fit the way that the character in the fiction actually works. And so it was kind of a fun exercise, but probably not one that I'll repeat again anytime soon, I don't think. And then at the top of the Tier 3 builds, we have at number 19 with 51.93, the Moon Druid. This was my next of the spike growth characters. And this was a lot of fun. It was primarily like finding the best concentration spell for sustained damage that I could find, casting it, and then transforming probably into a bear, grappling your target, and like either dragging them through spike growth or holding them in the spell's effect and things like that. Really cool. I think it would be really fun. If I were to ever play a druid, probably be this. Though I do know that moon druids famously are maybe way too strong in the early game, and then they peter out quickly as the character levels progress. But anyway, that wraps up Tier 3. So let's jump into Tier 2. We've got at number 18 with a tier score of 51.98, so barely better than that Moon Druid, the Undead Warlock. This character, this surprises me. The amount of damage that this character could do surprised me at the time and still does today, because my intention with it was to kind of create a support-focused character. But support, used loosely here, primarily the support was control, right? It was to try to lock down the enemies. You fear them, and then with Conquest Paladin levels, you freeze them in place. And I still love the concept. I think it would be a ton of fun to play, but they actually then surprisingly did a healthy amount of damage while they were at it. So kind of getting back to that theme that I talked in my video earlier this week about, building these support characters that can also do decent damage, whether burst or, in this case, sustained. At number 17, with a tier score of 52, we have the Spore Beast. This was the Spore Druid Beast Barbarian. Again, another one of those, they bring a lot to the table from a damage perspective, but then between fights in particular with this character, a lot of great healing options, support and utility options. This one was fun, and a great recreation of maybe what it would be to be a creature out of a horror movie, I think. And when I said earlier that I would play the Moon Druid if I had to go Druid, I think I lied. I think it would be this one. Although they were as much, if not more, Barbarian than they were. No. I think I started Barbarian, but then finished primarily with Druid. They probably ended up with more Druid levels than anything, because you need those temporary hit points for Spore Druid to work. Anyway, let's see. We've got at number 16 with a score of 53, the Phytarian. I started off this episode. This was one of my earlier episodes, and my intention was not necessarily to build a character, but just to kind of make an analytical comparison between which is stronger, using Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master, the fighter or the barbarian. And as it turned out, the answer was both. Oh, that's a peek into my brain as to why I like multiclassing so much, right? But then I wanted to know, well, should I start fighter? Should I start barbarian? And let's look at all the different ways we could build a character and see, what's the ultimate way to do it. And so that was fun. But yeah, we ended up with something that was not surprisingly, I guess now, started as barbarian and then ended up with more fighter levels than anything. And then I actually ended up playing a version of this character in one of the campaigns that we were doing back at the time. And I remember really loving that character. They were just a big dumb oaf that just destroyed stuff, and it was fun. I should mention that with one exception, I have not gone back to like redo numbers on any of these characters. Anytime there was maybe an error made or anything, actually, sorry, two exceptions. So like in this case with the Phytarian, at the time, I believe I was using the Unearthed Arcana version of the Rune Knight, which got an extra 1d6 of damage on every single attack once they use their Giant's Might transformation. So the numbers on this character should probably be scaled down a little bit. I just don't have the time to go back and revisit every time Wizards of the Coast makes a change or I screwed something up, because that happens every single video, as you well know. So anyway, again, grain of salt on all of this stuff, right? At number 15, with a tier score of 53.67, we have the Eldritch Sorcerer, the Sorlock. This was another really early video, and you know, this character was actually so before I even ever started this channel, I saw somebody post about a build that was similar to this in some subreddit. It might have been 3D6 subreddit, and the way that they graphed the DPR based on like enemy armor class and stuff is kind of what sparked the idea for me on doing the same thing and comparing, you know, builds to one another. So credit to that guy, whoever that was. Yeah, this was a fun one. This was another, you know, you start Warlock and you take Darkness and Devil's Sight, and then you just Eldritch Blast stuff with, you know, using a bonus action for Spiritual Weapon. I still think it's a really strong and viable character build, and the sustained damage is really quite good. At number 14, with a score of 53.78, we have the Ranged Fighter, the Crossbow Fighter. This was my second ever video, and you know, it was this and the Hexblade, Polearm Master Warlock, my first video. These two between them. Before I even ever started this channel, I was reading a lot on subreddits and things about, you know, what the best sustained damage builds for D&D are, and they were all, most people seemed to agree it was like, you know, Warlock, Devil Sight, Darkness, Polearm Master, Great Weapon Master, Hexblade, of course. And or the ranged fighter, you know, crossbow using, crossbow expert, sharpshooter feat, etc. And that you really couldn't do better than that. And so I started trying to crunch numbers on them and graph them, but then also, you know, adjust for enemy armor class and all that kind of stuff, and see what maybe averages were to compare them to one another. So this was one of the first that really was kind of the impetus to start the channel in the first place. You know, initially it was just a, hey, let's take, you know, the known best builds and then compare them to what we're doing. Because at the time I was playing a Blade Singer in our campaign, and I was feeling like this character is really, really strong. And I feel like it's maybe better than, you know, these other kind of known best in class, but I need to crunch the numbers to see if I'm right, basically. And so that's kind of what started it all. But anyway, this was just a straight fighter. I also was using the Unearthed Arcana version of the Rune Knight, so I don't think I adjusted these numbers. I might have when Tasha's Cauldron of Everything came out, and the official Rune Knight version came out. I'm having a hard time remembering now. I should probably double check that. But anyway, you know, it's solid. It's very straightforward. You just shoot stuff. But you can do so very well, and they have some really great burst damage capabilities too that I didn't graph for, but thanks to Action Surge. At number 13, with a 54.27 tier score, we have probably my weirdest build to date, the Thornlock. This was another one of those, wouldn't it be cool if, you know, self-imposed restriction concept characters that I love and I would love to play, but maybe of all the builds it might require the most buy-in from your dungeon master as well. So this character was based completely around the idea that you grapple somebody and then you can only do damage to them when they hit you. And I don't mean like they hit me, okay, great, now I can attack back. No, they took damage upon hitting you. And that was all. And you didn't do damage otherwise. And we still got all the way up to a 54.27, which is hilarious and awesome, I think. But yeah, you definitely have to talk to your DM and be like, okay, this is my character, this is my concept. Like, I just want to go in and grapple creatures, but I'm not going to do any damage to them unless they hit me. Like, do you think that this is going to work in game? Can you agree to attack me when I grapple you at least some of the time or most of the time, you know? So it can be a bit of a stretch, but with buy-in from your DM, this would be an absolute riot to play, and really powerful too, for that matter. So anyway, at number 12, with a tier score of 57.53, we have the Infiltrator, the Armorer, but not the Guardian version, the Infiltrator model. And this was a lot of fun. This was basically like a recreation of Iron Man. I said I wouldn't do third party, and it's not really, but maybe as close as I'll get to doing a Marvel character in D&D. Because, you know, you got the suit and you're shooting lightning blasts and stuff. They were really built to be kind of an infiltrator, a spy, an assassin, a rogue, you know, high stealth skills, high rogue utility abilities. And yeah, just doing lots of awesome ranged lightning damage, piling on some sneak attack, and bringing a lot of utility to the fight, to the party as well. At number 11, with a 57.65 tier score, we have the Swashbuckler. My first Swashbuckler, not the Swashbuckler Nova that I've done recently, but the sustained damage version of the Swashbuckler. This was the only time that I made a mistake that was so egregious, I think, that I had to release an errata video the next day to be like, I kind of screwed this one up. Yeah, I won't go into the details here, but when Tasha's Cauldron of Everything came out, I did make some adjustments to it that improved it, I think, substituting essentially what I believe at the time was Hunter Ranger levels for Beastmaster Ranger levels, and it actually improved the damage. I think I adjusted the numbers, but if I didn't, the numbers are going to be a little bit better than what I'm reporting on in the video and on the spreadsheet. So anyway, using your bonus action to have your pet make an attack. That was a lot of fun, very powerful. My friend Tori played this build in the campaign to great effect, actually. And yeah, it was a good one. At number 10, and at the top of the tier 2 list now currently, we have, with a 59 tier score, the Eldritch Blade Master, the Eldritch Knight Blade Singer that I did just a few weeks ago and has destroyed all previous records of like most views in the shortest amount of time kind of thing. I think last I looked it was at 55,000 views or something like that, which is awesome and crazy. I guess that should be expected when you put Eldritch Knight and Blade Singer in, you know, the title of a video. Had a lot of fun with this one, really loved it. It was a true just Shadow Blade wielder, and it really shines at later levels. It was okay, decent early on, but really took off once you hit 13 and you got that fun synergy between the Blade Singer's extra attack that lets them use a cantrip, and then the Eldritch Knight's, if you take the attack action, you can cast if you use a cantrip, you can get another attack. That's when it kind of really got awesome. But up until that point, it was still very strong, very viable, I think, and would be a ton of fun to play. All right, here we are at tier 1. So, starting off at number 9 with a tier score of 60 was the Ultimate Crit Fisher, the Crit Fisher build that I did. And some of you may be saying, why is a Crit Fisher in a sustained damage spreadsheet and not in a burst damage spreadsheet? You know, the idea for the build really was to be fishing for crits, and when you crit, pile on sneak attack damage, right? Pile on divine smite damage. And so yes, you would have big burst, big Nova attacks. But at the end of the day, when I build for Nova, I do so with the aim to like have some on-demand burst damage. And this, while it was looking for every way possible to increase my critical hit chance, and then when you crit, hit for a lot of damage, I can't know when you're going to roll a crit. And so at the end of the day, it just felt like, yeah, we just got to average it all out and then assume when you crit, you're going to sneak attack. And so taking all of those things into consideration, here's the average damage over time kind of thing. So it definitely would be, of all of my sustained damage builds, I think the one that was most sort of spiky, right? Where it's like sometimes you're not doing great, but then when you do crit, you just kaboom. So it would be maybe a little bit of a hybrid almost between like a sustained damage and a Nova damage build if you really like both playstyles. At number 8, with a 62 tier score, this one is surprising. It surprised me just when I was putting this list together earlier today. The Pokemon Trainer. Of all of my like self-restricted, weird rules builds that I've done, this one seems to be the top performer from a numbers perspective, anyway, from a sustained damage perspective. So you don't have to like Pokemon to want to play this character. In fact, the Pokemon stuff was really more than anything an attempt on my part to try to maybe provide some clickbait or get people who liked Pokemon to click on the video. The concept was my character could not make attacks. They could only do damage with creatures that they had summoned. And I ended up, I think, by the end with like 5 different characters that I had on the field that were like making attacks for me and stuff. And I was just kind of sacrificing all of my own actions and bonus actions and everything to let them take attacks. And it was a lot of fun. It was a little crazy. I remember at the time it being the build that I had spent way more time on than any other build to date. It took me like twice as long as a build usually takes, just trying to pore over all the different things that you could summon and compare them to one another and trying to figure out, well, how do I get that, and at what level do I take this subclass so I can pick that up, and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I was actually really impressed with it, and I think it would be a ton of fun to play. My friend Corey played it in our 20K, 20,000 subscriber PvP battle that we had. If you haven't seen that, check it out there. So yeah, that was a fun one, and if you really like fighting with summoned creatures, go ahead and check out the Pokemon Trainer. And you don't have to flavor it as Pokemon, but if you want to, you can. At number 7, we have the Drake Warden with a 63 tier score. So this was just like a month ago at the time of this recording anyway. New from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. The Drake Warden, I think, outperforms Beastmaster 2.0 for single target sustained damage per round rangers with pets. But to be fair, I did sell out and take Peace Cleric levels to get there, so the shame. I can barely live with it. Oh, shoot. That was a good one. That would be a fun one to play too. I love dragons, and so having a little pet dragon would be great. But yeah, like I said in that video, I mean, a lot of the best like dragony things I ended up passing on because they just didn't add a lot to the sustained damage. So anyway, at number 6, we have like last week's build at 65, a tier score of 65, the Artillerist. Who says artificers are weak? I did. That's who. Yeah. Admittedly, with the Artillerist, it was damage to 2 characters, and so some of the time you weren't going to be able to get 2 characters in range of what you were trying to do. Admittedly, some of the times you'd be able to get more, so I felt like 2 was conservative. You may disagree. Might not always be the best choice to go with tactically, but yeah, that was a lot of fun. I was surprised at how strong the Artillerist ended up being, as long as you can let yourself try and do area damage instead of single target. Oh, at number 5, with a tier score of 67, this is maybe the build that I'm most ashamed of of all of the builds that I've done, because of all of the builds that I've done, I think it's probably the least viable. 67, the Grappler Monk. You know, with this build, I was so excited. I was so excited for it when I had first finished it. I was so excited to share with the world this amazing monk that I had built, and I think I let my desire to get a monk into like high tier DPR cloud my judgment, and it breaks my heart a little bit. The problem was I took Spore Druid levels, but only 2, I think, and was assuming that I was going to be able to keep the added damage that Spore Druid gives you all the time. And it's because I hadn't realized that they had updated the Spore Druid from the Unearthed Arcana to release and said that you only get that extra damage so long as you maintain the temporary hit points that Spore Druid gives you. And the reality was you were grappling, you were an Astral Monk, well, okay, you were a Astral Monk, Fighter, Druid, Warlock, Rogue. Oh, shoot. And you were grappling with your astral arms and then making these attacks. And gosh, I loved the concept, and it was crazy and weird and fun, and the damage was great. But the reality is, yeah, you weren't going to be able to hold on to those temporary hit points, and so your damage really would have suffered. I did end up redoing the build in a Reddit post on our D&D optimized subreddit. You could probably find it there, or maybe I could link to it if somebody asks me. I could dig and try and find it. That was much more viable, I think. I dropped a lot of the classes, and I think I just ended up going Ranger, Fighter, Monk, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Rogue. And it did less damage, but I think it was a lot more viable. These numbers are not representative, though, and so, yeah, I should adjust them, I know, but the video wasn't, frankly, ever all that popular, and I just haven't found the time to go back and revisit it and redo it, but I'd probably have to redo a whole video on it. So maybe I'll do that one day and revisit the Grappler Astral Monk and see if I can make it at least break into tier 3 for sustained damage. At number 4, with a tier score of 68, we have the one that started it all, the Pamlock, the Hexblade Warlock. You take Devil's Sight, you cast Darkness on yourself or Shadow of Moil later on, and Polearm Master and Great Weapon Master, and Elven Accuracy even eventually, potentially, and you just kill stuff. And for as strong as Hexblade dipping is, and you guys know I'm guilty of dipping a fair number of Hexblades myself, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's surprising that more people don't appreciate the power of just like the full Hexblade. It's one of the few, I think, subclasses that scales really well throughout their career, right? All the way up until like level 14, where you can transfer your Hexblade's Curse to another target when the first one dies, at least once per short rest, is so powerful, and you get all these great things that kind of add to it as you continue to level. That for me, if I were to build a Hexblade and just like really focus on sustained damage, I'd have a hard time multi-classing out of it. Maybe take some fighter levels, but beyond that, I don't know that I would. But anyway, yeah, that was a fun one, and still one of my most popular ever videos, despite the long pauses and terrible editing and lighting and everything else that's wrong with it. But yeah, that's a fun one to think about. At number 3, with a tier score of 75, we have the Death Cleric. Again, a caveat with this, that the damage was done to 2 targets, but I think it's actually even more reliable and much more conservative to assume that you're only going to get 2 targets here with the Death Cleric, because a lot of their damage was coming from Spirit Guardians, which has a huge range, right? Yeah, I played this character in a campaign about a year ago or so, and it was really fun and really powerful. I I don't have a lot to say about it other than it was just devastating to groups of enemies especially. So if you're looking for a great sustained damage to multiple enemies character, it's hard to beat, I think, the Death Cleric. At number 2, we have the last of the spike growth characters that I've built. So with a 77 tier score, the cheese grater, the Sorlock cheese grater. So yeah, this was, throw down spike growth and just Eldritch Blast, push and pull, drag them back and forth over spike growth for the most part, with some other little tricks in there. Somebody ought to play a campaign with the with the Swarmkeeper Ranger, the Moon Druid, and the Cheese Grater build. Only one person would need to cast Spike Growth. The other two could then concentrate on other spells. Woof! That would be amazing. I wonder if it's not too late to convince the Dungeon Dudes and Treant Monk to roll these with me in our upcoming collaboration. Anyway, yeah, that was a good one. A lot of fun. I had had a lot of requests for it up to that point, so I really had a great time building it and was really surprised at how effective it was. But at number 1, surprising probably nobody, with a tier score of 79, we have, yes, the Bladesinger. Bladesinger 2.0, which is still to date by far my most popular ever video. So, okay, knowing that, and this is the only time I'm going to heavily look at some notes here, knowing that this build was still sitting at the top spot, I actually did rework the numbers for this because I wanted to be sure that it actually should still be there. Because as many, probably most, if not all of you know, I had suggested in this video to take custom lineage and then take the Elven accuracy feat. Which I had done up until that point a few times. It's not actually one that I did much. There were only 2 sustained damage builds that I did this with, and the the Grappler Monk was the other one. I might be mistaken, but I think I'm not. Anyway, as we know, thanks to a ruling by Jeremy Crawford, which I was thrilled to get, frankly, even though it made me eat some humble pie, we can't do this, right? Unless your DM says otherwise. And so I thought, this probably is not going to be at the top anymore if I were to rework these numbers with that in mind. So I redid the numbers. But I also did make a change in when I was redoing the numbers in the Bladesinger's favor, because I also, at the time that I released this video, assumed that Shadowblade and Booming Blade would not work together. And if we instead assume, as apparently the vast majority of tables allow based on everything that I've read and including polls that I myself have conducted amongst my viewers and on Twitter and everything, the vast majority, like I've said before, can do Shadowblade if they're using, can use Booming Blade if they're using Shadowblade, either by just hitting them with Shadowblade and casting Booming Blade, or potentially more proper rules as written, making a Booming Blade attack with a weapon that they're holding in their other hand, a short sword, etc. Then, that increases the numbers. And so, yeah, losing out on Elven accuracy early on hurt us a little bit, but then being able to add Booming Blade once we got extra attack with Bladesinger helped us. And in fact, it more than made up the difference, to the point where it raised our average number just a smidge. So, okay, yes, in the end, we are making some assumptions when we crunch these numbers, right? We're assuming that we're in dim light when we're using Shadowblade spell, which was not throughout this particular character's career. Obviously, that's not always going to be the case. We were assuming that the enemy was not resistant to non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage when we were using the Animate Objects spell. Now, admittedly, your DM may consider Animate Objects to be magical for the purpose of overcoming. This would go on the bloopers reel if I were taking time to make one. for the purpose of overcoming non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. Your DM may assume that that qualifies anyway. But the truth is, we assume a lot of things with every one of these builds, with every character that you build in Dungeons and Dragons, right? I mean, we have to make assumptions, or we can't do anything to crunch these numbers that's useful or reliable. If your enemy has blind sense or casts fog cloud, then darkness and devil sight isn't going to work. If you can't reach your enemy, but you're a melee character, right? Maybe they're flying, maybe they're up on a ledge. Well, you're not doing a lot of damage there. You're throwing a javelin, right? If casting spike growth is just too disruptive for your party, then those builds don't work. If you can't get 2 characters in range for the 2 target builds, etc., etc., etc. I always assume best case scenario. I try to be at least semi-conservative for how often I think that we'll be able to get those best case scenario situations, and let you guys adjust accordingly. I've kind of always done that. I think I always will do that. You know, yes, we're creating these characters in a lab, and no, once we get out into the battlefield, you know, stuff happens and things don't always go the way that we think they're going to go, but that's okay. I think that's sort of part of the fun of D&D. And sometimes we might realize, this character isn't as viable as I thought they were, or at least not as powerful as I thought they were going to be because extenuating circumstances. Anyway, at the end of the day, I hope you won't fault me too much for showing perhaps a teeny bit of favoritism to my baby. I'm sure one day I will build something that dethrones my beloved Blade Singer. And when I do, I'll have to just go back to the drawing board and rebuild another one in order to try and regain the title. So anyway, that's it. That's separating the sustained damage characters into tiers. And, you know, I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane with me. And maybe it sparked your interest in one of the videos that you haven't seen before. If so, I hope you'll check them out. But regardless, I love you guys. I think you're fantastic. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and I hope to see you again very soon. So thanks. Take care.